Hey, my name is Wes Calloway. I'm 36 years old, and I run a two-bay auto garage in Marins Point, Minnesota, a lake town small enough that the population sign and the speed limit sign are the same number. I fix brakes, alternators, snow tires in October, dead batteries in January. My hands are never fully clean, and my coffee is never fully hot, and for 2 years my life has been a closed loop the size of 4 blocks. Garage, gas station, grocery store, home. A man can live a long time on 4 blocks if he's careful not to look up. Here's what you'd learn about me if you asked anyone in town, and you wouldn't even have to ask, because in Marins Point information is a public utility. I was married to June Calloway. June was the kind of person towns get maybe one of. And 2 years ago, on an ordinary Tuesday in March, June stood up from the kitchen table, said she felt a headache coming on, and was gone before the ambulance made it off the highway. An aneurysm. 33 years old. No warning, no goodbye, no last words except the truly last ones, which were, and I have turned these over 10,000 times, don't let the kettle boil over. The kettle didn't boil over. I've kept that promise every day since, for whatever it's worth, which is nothing, which is everything. I should tell you about the casseroles, because you can't understand June or anything that happened after without them. June ran what this town called the Casserole Brigade, and what she called keeping an eye out. If anything happened to anyone in Marins Point, a surgery, a funeral, a baby, a bad diagnosis, June Calloway's blue enamel dishes showed up on the doorstep within a day. Hot, heavy, wrapped in a dish towel, masking tape on the bottom reading CALLOWAY in her block letters. A dozen of those dishes moved through this town like currency. She cooked the way other people pray, regularly and on behalf of others. And every dish had a note taped inside the lid. That was her signature. Handwritten, on whatever paper was nearby, addressed to whoever the dish was for. I never read them. They were private, she said. Between her and the person having the bad year. But every note ended the same way because she said it out loud while she taped the lids down, like a blessing she was sealing in. Don't return this dish empty. Bad luck. Bring it back full of anything, food, flowers, gossip, news. Come tell me how you are. That was the toll. You paid June in sitting down at her kitchen table and being known. When she died, the dishes were scattered all over the county. In the weeks after the funeral, some came back. People stood on my porch holding clean blue dishes and crying, and I'd thank them and put the dishes in the cupboard. 8 came home. 4 didn't, and I never chased them, because chasing them meant conversations, and I'd retired from conversations. The brigade ended the day she did. 2 years. Garage, gas station, grocery store, home. People stopped saying her name around me, out of kindness, which is its own kind of cruelty because a man can starve on that diet. By this past spring, the only place June still existed out loud was the masking tape on the bottoms of 8 blue dishes in a cupboard I didn't open. Then, in April, somebody bought the old Hollis place. The Hollis house is a tall, tired Victorian 2 blocks up from my garage, empty for a year since Eleanor Hollis went into assisted living in Brainerd. Peeling paint, porch like a dropped pie. The rumor mill reported that some woman from Chicago had bought it sight unseen, alone, which in Marins Point is 3 scandals in one sentence. I saw her around before I met her. You couldn't not. She drove a paneled van with the ghost of a business decal peeled off the side, always carrying something, lumber, a crowbar, paint cans, sacks of flour, a strange grocery list. At the hardware store, Gil taught her to sweat a copper pipe, and she did it right the second time, and Gil's respect is a currency rarer than money. The coffee crowd settled on a theory. Divorce. The van, the alone, the way she worked on that house like it had insulted her. I had no theory. I had 4 blocks. Then came a Thursday at the end of April, gray sky over the lake like a lid. I was alone in the garage, under a Buick when I heard footsteps stop on the gravel, the hesitation of somebody not sure they should be here. I rolled out from under the car. A woman was standing in the open bay door with the light behind her. Mid-30s. Honey-colored hair pulled back loose, strands escaping around her face. Flour, actual flour, dusted on one forearm like she'd been baking and had left in the middle of it because if she stopped to clean up she'd lose her nerve. And in her hands, held out in front of her with a strange ceremony, like something breakable, like something explosive, was a blue enamel casserole dish. I knew the dish before I knew anything else in the world. I knew it the way you know your own front door. Mr. Calloway? Her voice was careful. I'm Sadie Lawrence. I bought the Hollis house. She took a breath, and I watched her decide to say the rest of it fast, like pulling a bandage. I was cleaning out the kitchen cupboards last week, and I found this way in the back behind the canning jars. It has your name on the bottom. I asked at the bakery who Calloway was, and they told me. About your wife. I'm so sorry. I wiped my hands on the rag, slow, buying time, because something was happening in my chest that I didn't have a procedure for. One of the 4 missing dishes. Eleanor Hollis, her broken hip, the winter before June died. The dish had sat in that dark cupboard for 3 years, waiting like dishes do. Thank you, I managed. You didn't have to walk it down. I did, though. Her knuckles were white on the enamel. Mr. Calloway, there's something else, and I need to tell you before I lose my nerve, because you're going to find it anyway, and I'd rather you hate me to my face. She looked up, and her eyes were gray-green, like the lake under that lid of sky, and they were scared and steady at the same time, which is a combination I've thought about a great deal since. There was a note taped inside the lid. It was old, the tape was yellow, and I didn't know what it was, and I opened it. I'm sorry. I read the note inside. The wind moved a paper cup across the gravel. Down the block, the school bus exhaled its brakes. It wasn't mine to read, she went on quieter. It was addressed to Eleanor. But it's her voice caught and held like a hand on a rail, the kind of thing that shouldn't sit in a dark cupboard. And the woman at the bakery said your wife passed very suddenly. And I thought, I don't know this man, but if there are words of hers in this dish, he should have them. Even if he's angry about how they got to him. She finally held the dish out. It was heavier than it should have been and warm. Warm? I looked at her. It's a chicken pot pie, she said, almost apologizing. The note said never to return the dish empty. It said that was the rule. She swallowed. It seemed like a rule worth keeping. I want to be honest about what I did next, because this is not a story where I'm the strong one. I carried that dish to the workbench like a transmission full of nitroglycerin. I lifted the lid. The smell of real cooking came up into a garage that had smelled of nothing but oil and winter for 2 years, and taped inside the lid, refastened carefully with one new piece of tape beside the old yellowed ones, was a folded square of paper in handwriting I had not seen one new word of in 730 days. June's hand. The impatient little gues. The capital E like a comb. Eleanor, it started. A broken hip is God's way of making a proud woman sit down and let the neighbors love her for once. Eat all of this yourself. Don't you dare freeze it for company. The recipe is my mother's, the crust is my own, and the gossip is this. Gil at the hardware store has a sweetheart in Brainerd and thinks nobody knows. Everybody knows. Heal up. I need you at the spring rummage. You're the only one who can price things without mercy. And then, the line I heard in her actual voice, standing in my garage with my knees going strange. Don't return this dish empty. Bad luck. Bring it back full of anything, food, flowers, news. Come tell me how you are. Love, June. Come tell me how you are. 2 years of this town tiptoeing around her name like a hole in the ice, and here was June, bossy and laughing and alive on a piece of paper, demanding the one thing nobody could deliver anymore. I stood there with my thumb on her handwriting and the steam coming off a stranger's pot pie, and for the first time since the funeral, in front of a woman I had known for 4 minutes, I cried. Sadie Lawrence did not flee and she did not fuss. She did the third thing, the rarest thing. She pulled the shop stool over with her foot, sat down a polite distance away, and looked out at the gray lake while a grown man fell apart by his workbench, guarding the moment like a stranger holding a door. When I could talk, what came out was, she never got to say goodbye. There was no, I gestured at nothing, the universal sign for everything. It was 11 minutes, start to finish. The last thing she said to me was about the kettle. Sadie was quiet a moment. Then she said, looking at the lake and not at me, which made it possible to hear, I read it 4 times before I walked down here. I felt terrible, and I kept reading it. Because you can hear her. I never met her, and I can hear her. She turned then. I figured a voice like that shouldn't be stuck in my cupboard. It should be wherever you are. I looked at the note and the dish and the brave, flour-dusted woman who had carried both 2 blocks downhill to hand a dead woman's words to a stranger with dinner, because those were the rules. You keep the rule better than people who knew her, I said. I'm good with rules other people quit on, she said, and something crossed her face when she said it, a weather from somewhere else, and was gone. She stood, brushed the flour off her arm, finally, and nodded at the dish. The pie's better hot. Good night, Mr. Calloway. Wes, I said. Wes. She stopped at the edge of the bay door, half in the gray light. For what it's worth, from the outside. A woman who tapes that note into a casserole for a neighbor with a broken hip. She shook her head slowly, looking for the measurement, and found it. You don't get over a person like that. You just find what to do with what she left running. And she walked back up the hill, and I went home and ate a stranger's pot pie at June's kitchen table with June's note propped against the salt shaker. And I read it until I knew it by heart, and the kettle did not boil over. And for the first night in 2 years, the house felt less like a museum and more like a place where somebody might still be expected. A man should return a dish. That's manners, and manners were the cover story I told myself for 2 weeks, while I figured out what a mechanic puts in a casserole dish for a pastry chef. Because that's what she was. I'd learned it in line at the grocery store. Sadie Lawrence, 33, had owned a bakery cafe in Chicago with her husband. The husband was now her ex-husband, and the bakery was now his bakery, and the details were the kind people lowered their voices for. She'd come north with a van, a settlement spent entirely on the Hollis house, and a plan to open a bakery on Main Street by fall, which the coffee crowd rated somewhere between brave and bless her heart. I couldn't cook. June had been the cook, but a dish must not come back empty, so I filled it with the only thing I had. I drove up to the Hollis place on a Saturday, and when Sadie opened the door, paint in her hair, I held out the blue dish, and in it was a rebuilt carburetor for a 1974 panel van, the exact model whose death rattle I'd been hearing around town for a month. She looked at it a long time. Most people lead with banana bread. It's full of news, I said. The news is your van's going to die in front of the Lutheran church some Sunday and the whole town will form opinions. This carburetor and I can prevent that. And Sadie Lawrence laughed, this sudden, unguarded, bent-forward laugh, the first one I'd caused in another human being in 2 years, and it did something to my sternum I elected not to examine, and she said, well, rules are rules. You'd better come install the news. That was how it started. Not a date. An installation. The Hollis house, inside, was a war between decay and one determined woman. She'd gutted the kitchen herself and was rebuilding it around a salvaged commercial oven from a restaurant auction in Duluth, and she worked the way I work, stubborn, methodical, swearing quietly. That Saturday turned into me fixing the van while she fed me test batches through the porch rail, and that turned into Tuesdays, and Tuesdays turned into a standing thing neither of us named. There is no safer way for two careful people to sit close than to aim themselves at a broken object together. I taught her the house. She taught me food. I rebuilt her porch stairs. She rebuilt my opinion of cardamom. And in pieces, sideways, over solder and proofing dough, the weather I'd seen cross her face that first day came out. Her ex-husband, Paul, had been the front of the house, the handshake, the face. She'd been the 4 a.m. bake, the recipes, the actual food. When it ended, his name was on the LLC, his lawyer was better, and the non-compete he'd slipped into their partnership agreement meant she couldn't open so much as a lemonade stand within 50 miles of Chicago. The recipes she'd written in her own hand in her grandmother's notebook were, quote, intellectual property of the business, unquote. He kept the bakery. He kept her recipes. The week she left, he'd renamed the place after his new girlfriend. The thing nobody warns you about, she said one night, up to her wrists in dough, not looking at me, in a flat inventory voice I knew too well, is that he didn't just take the business. He took the proof. 11 years of my work with his name on it. I used to be sure I was good. Now I'm 700 miles from anyone who ever tasted it, telling a town of strangers I'm worth a storefront. And some nights I need bread at 2 in the morning just to check my hands still know things. I said June used to say you can tell everything about a person by what they do with their hands when they're sad. Sadie looked at my hands, which were rewiring her exhaust fan at 9 at night, and then at her own, in the dough, and neither of us said the obvious out loud because it didn't need saying. It was Sadie's idea of what came next, and I want that on the record. A Tuesday in June, a hard month for me, eating a failed experiment she called a success on her unfinished porch, when Linda Maxwell drove by slow and waved, and Sadie said, Linda's husband starts chemo in Duluth on Monday. She's doing the drive alone every day. A pause. Then, careful as a hand on a rail, you have 8 blue dishes in a cupboard. I have a commercial oven and no customers yet. And the note says, come tell me how you are. She turned to me in the porch light, and her eyes were the lake again, scared and steady. I never met her, Wes. I can't bring her back. But I know how to keep a kitchen running. We could put the brigade back on the road. If it's too much, if it's hers, tell me, and I'll never mention it again. I looked at the lake for a while. 2 years, the town had treated June's name like thin ice, and here was a stranger proposing to drive across it with a hot dish. She'd have hated the casseroles sitting in a dark cupboard, I said finally. She'd have called it a waste of good enamel. My voice went rough. But the notes were hers. I can't write them. You won't have to, Sadie said. I'll cook. You deliver and fix. Whatever's broken at the house, a gutter, a faucet, a car that won't start for the hospital drive, that's your note. You'll write it with a wrench. So the blue dishes went back on the road, and this time there were 2 of us. Monday nights, Sadie's half-finished kitchen turned out 6-8 dishes, and Tuesdays, after the garage closed, I drove June's old routes, and while the food landed, I'd fix the thing at each house nobody had the heart or money to fix. Linda Maxwell's brakes, which were metal on metal, which she'd been driving to a cancer ward on. The Kowalczyk porch light, a water heater here, a storm door there. Inside every lid, Sadie taped a note. She wouldn't let me read them, the way June never let me. They're private, she said. Between me and the person having the bad year. But I know they ended the same way, all of them. In Sadie's handwriting, in June's words. Don't return this dish empty. Come tell us how you are. Us. The first time I saw that word taped inside a lid, I had to go stand in the parking lot for a minute. And the dishes started coming back. Full. Wild rice from the Maxwells. Tomatoes, a pie. A dish full of crocheted dishcloths from a woman who didn't cook, news, gossip, thanks. The town slowly remembering a language. By August, Marin's Point had decided things about Sadie and me, and it was not wrong, even if we hadn't admitted it ourselves, and the bakery stopped being Bless Her Heart and became When Does It Open? I'd like to leave the story there a moment in August in the gold light, because what came in September I still have to take a slow breath to tell. What I didn't think about, because grief makes a man an only child, is that I wasn't the only person who'd buried June Calloway. Her mother, Dorothy Hale, lives 40 minutes inland. I'd kept up the Sunday visits, the lawn, the gutters. But I never told her about the brigade starting back up. I told myself I was protecting her. The truth is, I was a coward about a hard conversation. And that bill came due the way those bills always do in public at the worst moment. The county paper ran a piece the first week of September. In E.W. Bakar, Old Kindeness, Casserole Brigade rides again. A photo of Sadie in her apron holding a blue enamel dish, my garage in the background. The article was sweet and mostly accurate, used June's name 4 times, and the phrase that did the damage was carrying on the tradition of the late June Calloway, right under a stranger's photograph. Dorothy read it at her kitchen table, alone, with no warning, because her son-in-law hadn't had the spine to give her one. She drove 40 minutes into town with the paper on the passenger seat, and she didn't come to me. She walked into the half-finished bakery where Sadie was up a ladder painting trim 2 weeks before opening, and in front of Gil, 2 carpenters, and the entire coffee crowd through the window. Dorothy Hale, 71 years old, held up the newspaper like a verdict, and said the words that went around town before sundown. You didn't know my daughter. You have her dishes, you have her husband, and now you have her name in the paper for your grand opening. She's not a recipe, she's not a story to sell bread with. She was my girl, and you are building your business on her grave. I got there 11 minutes too late. By the time I came through the door, Dorothy was gone, and the bakery was silent the way a room is silent after a window breaks. Sadie was still on the ladder, brush in hand, perfectly still, and the coffee crowd was dispersing outside with the energy of people who'd just received a year's supply of conversation. She came down the ladder slow. Don't, she said before I'd said anything. Not cold. Worse than cold. Careful. She's not wrong, Wes. Take her side of it for 1 second. A stranger from Chicago moves to town, and inside 5 months she's got her daughter's dishes, her daughter's tradition, her daughter's. She stopped on the word husband and stepped around it, and the stepping around hurt more than the word would have, and her daughter's name in the newspaper over a photo of somebody else. If I were her, I'd have said it too. I'd have said worse. She doesn't know you. She doesn't want to know me. Why would she? Knowing me costs her something. Sadie set the brush down, very precisely, the way you handle things when your hands want to shake. I've been here before. Standing in a kitchen I built, being told my work belongs to somebody else's story. Last time I fought, and I lost everything anyway, and it took me 2 years and 700 miles to want to build again. I don't. Her voice finally cracked, one clean line. Like ice. I don't think I can be the woman who gets between a mother and her dead daughter, Wes. There's no version of winning that. Maybe the brigade was a mistake. Maybe the opening should wait. Maybe, and she looked around the half-painted room, at the salvaged oven, at the hand-lettered menu board leaning against the wall, taking inventory of a life one more time. Maybe I read a note in a cupboard and wanted so badly to belong to it that I didn't ask whose permission I needed. You asked mine. You're not the only one who buried her. She said it gently, and it landed like a wrench from a height. Because it was true, and it was the exact true thing I'd been hiding from for 5 months. She untied her apron. Go see Dorothy Wes. Not for me. That woman drove 40 minutes alone with a newspaper. I know what that drive feels like. Somebody should be sitting with her, and it should be the person who forgot she existed. I have been ashamed of myself a few times in my life. The drive to Dorothy's that evening was the longest of all of them. She was at the kitchen table when I let myself in, the paper folded in front of her, under the wall of photographs. June at 6, gap-toothed. June at the lake. June in white. She didn't look up. Come to explain? She said. Or to apologize. Apologize. The explaining part I got wrong already by not doing it. So I sat where I'd sat at 100 Sunday dinners and I told her all of it from the beginning. The footsteps on the gravel. The stranger in the bay door holding the lost dish with dinner in it, keeping a dead woman's rule before she ever knew the woman. The note itself, Dorothy. Eleanor, a broken hip is God's way of making a proud woman sit down. Dorothy's hand went to her mouth at the impatient little geese of it. I told her about the carburetor in the casserole dish, the brakes that were metal on metal under a woman driving to chemotherapy, the dishes coming back full. And then I told her the part I'd owed her for months. I should have driven out here in June and told you everything. I told myself it would hurt you. The truth is I didn't know how to say it. Because here's what it is, Dorothy, here's the whole of it. My voice went to gravel and I let it. I'm 36. The day we buried her, the part of me that was a husband lay down and decided it was finished. Then a stranger walked into my garage carrying June's handwriting and June's rule, and that part of me stood back up, and I felt like a traitor every day since, and happy, and like a traitor about the happy. So I hid it from you, because your grief is bigger than mine, and I couldn't stand for you to look at me the way I stopped. The way you're not actually looking at me right now. Dorothy was quiet a long time. Then she slid the newspaper aside, and underneath it was a shoebox, and I realized she'd had it out before I ever arrived. Eleanor Hollis wasn't the only one who never returned something, she said. Her voice had June's stubbornness in it, or June's had hers. After the funeral, I took the dish she'd left in my refrigerator. Tater tot hot dish, half eaten. I couldn't eat the rest and I couldn't throw it out, so I froze it. It's still in my freezer, Wes. 2.5 years. And the note that was in the lid, she opened the shoebox, and it was full of paper, dozens of folded squares, years of them, every note June had ever taped into a dish for her own mother, saved like bonds, is in here with all the others. So don't sit there thinking I don't understand what that woman carried down the hill to you. I understand it better than anyone alive. That's why it took the legs out from under me, seeing it in the paper. Grief isn't sense, Wes. It's arithmetic. There's only so much of June left, and every person who gets a piece, her chin shook, 71 years old, and she mastered it. I count. I can't help it. I count. Dorothy. The woman in that photo wouldn't take a piece of June if it was offered. When I asked her to put her own name on the brigade, she said it's not mine. It runs on a borrowed engine. She tapes June's own words into every lid. She won't even read June's recipes. She asked once if there was a notebook, and I said yes, and she said good. Keep it safe. Some things should stay in the family. I leaned forward. Her ex-husband took 11 years of her recipes and put his name on them. She knows exactly what it is to watch a stranger wear your person's work. She would rather close that bakery than do it to you. As of this afternoon, she's thinking about it. Closing. Before it opens. Dorothy looked at the shoebox for a long moment. Then at the wall of photographs. Then at me. June would have had that girl at our table inside a week, she said, half to herself. And it wasn't surrender, it was arithmetic of a different kind. She'd have squeezed the whole story out of her by pie and been furious in Chicago's direction by coffee. She closed the box and pushed back her chair, and there was June in the movement. Well, drive me into town Saturday. If she's going to feed my daughter's neighbors out of my daughter's dishes, I'm going to stand in that kitchen and see her hands. You can tell everything about a person by what they do with their hands. Saturday, Dorothy Hale walked into the half-finished bakery carrying the shoebox and a frozen tater tot hot dish, and what happened in that kitchen happened out of my sight, because Dorothy sent me to the hardware store for nothing twice. When I came back the second time, the hot dish was thawing in the oven's pilot warmth, because some things you finally finish eating with company, and the shoebox was open on the counter, and Sadie was reading June's notes with tears running down her face, while Dorothy narrated each one's bad year over her shoulder like a curator. And the bakery opened on schedule the first Saturday of October, with a shelf by the register that Sadie built from wood out of the Hollis pantry, a hand-lettered sign reading June's shelf, and on it the recipe notebook, open under glass to the chicken pot pie. In June's hand, the impatient geese credited in the menu like scripture, and 8 blue enamel dishes in a row above it like a crown. Dorothy stood by that shelf all morning telling strangers about her daughter, and ate, by my count, 3 pieces of pie. The town came. All of it. The line went out the door. That night, after close, Sadie and I sat on the bakery's back steps overlooking the lake, splitting the last unsold pasty, the good kind of tired. Black glass water, 1 cold star. She had flour on her forearm. Some things don't change and shouldn't. I keep thinking about the cupboard, she said finally. 3 years that dish sat in the dark 2 blocks from you. If I'd hired cleaners, if I hadn't opened the lid, she shook her head. It came that close to staying lost. It wasn't lost, I said. It was waiting for somebody who keeps rules other people quit on. She looked at me then, gray-green, scared and steady, the bay door look, and I realized we'd arrived somewhere, and one of us had to say so, and that for the first time in 2.5 years I wanted the job. Sadie. The note said, "Come tell me how you are." Nobody could ever answer it, and it broke me in a garage in April. You watched it happen. I took her hand, flour and all, so I'm answering it now. For the record, I'm sitting on the back steps of the best thing to happen to Main Street in 20 years, with the woman who built it, who walked a dead woman's words downhill to a stranger because it was right, who gave my mother-in-law back her daughter's voice and took none of it for herself. I'm in love with her, that's how I am. June asked, and that's my answer, and I think, my voice went, and I let it would have been her answer for me too. Sadie Lawrence put down the pasty with great care, took my face in both hands, and kissed me, slow, certain tasting of butter in October, while the lake held its 1 star steady, and when she finally pulled back she stayed close and whispered, "Took you long enough." Dorothy and I had a side bet. They had. $5. Dorothy won. It hangs framed in the bakery, next to the register, the 5, and under it, in Dorothy's handwriting, "Some things come back full." We were married the following June, because Dorothy insisted, "Take the hard month back," she said, "fill the dish." 40 people in the orchard behind her house. Sadie baked her own cake. There was an empty chair in the front row with a blue enamel dish on it, full of peonies, and nobody had to explain it to anyone. The brigade runs every Monday. Bigger now. Gil drives a route. Linda Maxwell, whose husband rang the bell at the cancer ward in March, bakes for it like vengeance. Every dish goes out with a note in Sadie's hand, ending in June's words, and the dishes come back full: food, flowers, news, baby photos. Once a live chicken, we still have questions. And on slow afternoons in the garage, I look up at the bakery lights coming on, and I think how close it all came to staying in the dark. 1 cupboard. 1 curious, guilty, brave woman with flour on her arm. People ask me, new people, summer people, about the shelf, the note under glass. I tell them the truth. My wife died with no goodbye, and her last words to me were about a kettle. For 2 years I thought that was the whole inheritance. Then a stranger returned a dish she could have thrown away, confessed to reading a note she could have hidden, and handed me a goodbye June had left in the world without either of us knowing it. Taped inside a lid, addressed to a neighbor, meant, the way all her notes were meant for whoever needed it most. Don't return the dish empty. That was the rule. That was always the whole rule. She sent it back full, and it came back fuller, and somewhere my June is pricing this story without mercy and calling it a fair trade. Come tell me how you are. Well, June. We're good, sweetheart. The kettle's never once boiled over. And the dish is full.